specifically to guard against committing offenses in the course of resolving those issues that might even be more spiritually damaging than the original transgression itself. So I know it's kind of a very broad question, but if anything you could offer, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Well, what comes to mind first is a standard of sorts that we hear about from the oral tradition in Braj. And by that I refer to the reports, if you will, that Rupa and Sanatan residing in Braj were, although absorbed in their bhajan and their theological work through their writings and so forth, both of which made them less accessible, if you will, to the common folk. The history is such. I mentioned oral tradition, but let's for a moment go to the written tradition. I think there's some material written describing Sanatana Goswami's walking, as he would, through the villages and so forth, and how people would run up to him and children hold his hand and so forth and so on. And he was considered like, the grandfather of everybody. He was called Munda Baba because he always shaved his head. I've told the story before. When he passed away, every man, woman, and child in Braj shaved their heads to show allegiance to him. So as much as he and Rupa, for example, Rupa Goswami were internally absorbed and inaccessible, it appears that they were also accessible to the people of Braj, and that brought them in contact with the inevitable disputes, if you will, that would arise between people. And so it's said that they would go before Rupa Sanatan because they had complete confidence in their being unbiased or being fair and balanced with regard to their decision, caring equally about each party and so on and so forth. Because they had confidence in them, they would place the debate or over an issue. Maybe it wasn't, maybe it might have been a philosophical issue, or a bit more, the way the story goes anyway, history goes, is with regard to common disputes, which could be large, could be small, right? And they would decide, whatever they would decide, how then people would be satisfied because they had faith, they had confidence in it. So this is a beautiful story. And of course, it illustrates a very simple point, and that being that in order to settle disputes, you really need an objective party who will consider both sides from all angles and there's and can give an unbiased, kind of opinion. If he or she, of course, is familiar enough with the topic, then you get into some, relativity here. Familiar enough with the topic, you might find a person who's unbiased to deal with an issue, in a community that's not well informed on the subject matter, and so that might be a problem. And it depends, of course, how large the issue is, but I'm just talking about it in general. If it becomes a very big issue, well, then it has to go up the ladder in terms of who the unbiased person, would be to make the decision. He or she, like for example, myself, I don't have to make a decision about every dispute everybody has, obviously. But the more it becomes a prominent one, well, then it would seem appropriate to come to someone like myself, my attention. And, a word about me is I tend to be pretty, besides being unbiased, fair, caring about everybody, I tend to be pretty informed about things in the world and how they work and so forth. So, but I think that, just in principle, that you have to find an unbiased person. I remember once I had a dispute with a godbrother of mine who had taken sannyas from Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj. And Sridhar Maharaj asked me in private to try to get this guy engaged more. So I did, and I invited him to work with me and so on and so forth. And we, among other things, purchased a building. I raised really all the money and whatnot. But his name and my name were on the building. And anyway, at a certain point, he decided that he didn't want to work with me in the same mission. And so I said, that's fine. But then he wanted that, my mission would keep paying for the building. His name would be on it. He'd be getting half of the equity as the property value increased. And I thought that was rather unreasonable. And so we had a dispute. And so I suggested, well, let's have an arbitrator, and he agreed. And I selected one, and he wholeheartedly agreed to the arbitrator, another sannyasi from another related but another mission. Also a disciple of Prabhupada who had taken sannyas from Sridhar Maharaj. So anyway, he interviewed us and he asked us everything, both sides, to fully give our case and so forth. So he took it in, and then he came to his decision, and he said, Tripurari Maharaj 100% right, and the other Maharaj 0. That's how he decided. That's how I looked at it. But anyway, he was fair, and that was his verdict. And the other guy wouldn't accept it. So then, and there's a breakdown, which is unfortunate and dishonest. What can I say if someone does that? So we have to be able, if we trust them, and we have to be able to stomach, the fact that they may give a verdict that's different than the way we see it, think of it, feel about it, and so on and so forth. So anyway, just that little historical note in my own life in that regard. But that's how I, sought to resolve it, to find an objective person. And I think that's basically the standard. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah. Another question.
Sean has a question, and hopefully we can hear him this time. Okay, Sean.
Good morning, Maharaj. Thank you for your time today again. Hare Krishna.
Good morning.
I just had a question about a little backstory. I was having a conversation with a brahmachari that I used to hold in high regard. I have a lot of respect for, and became a good friend of mine. And I was recently talking to him. So I'm in the middle of a divorce. And
sorry to hear that.
It's okay. It's actually a mutual, it's a positive thing. And
okay.
We've basically decided that in order for us to grow into the next stages of our lives and be good parents, that we should do it separately and just have a mutual positive relationship as far as our child goes. So my question is, basically when I was talking with him, he was he started really coming down on me and was saying things like, you know, no other devotee is going to take you serious. Like you cannot achieve the higher, like a higher level because, you know, you've basically have committed this great offense. And he said that I have
What
failed.
offense did you commit?
I
Divorce
don't,
is an offense?
yes, I guess so. Yeah. And he was saying that, I have failed as a devotee and as a partner, I guess. He was also saying something. He was saying that I need to look at this as this is a like a test of Krishna for my tolerance, and just saying some pretty nasty personal things and I really just got me really bothered. So I wanted to come to you for advice and ask you, is this true? Like, am I going to be not shunned, but looked downly upon because of this? And also, I was not a devotee when me and my wife got married. This is something that's come since we've been married, that I've, you know, started getting into Krishna consciousness and Gaudiya Vaishnavism as a whole and stuff. So thank you again for your time.
Well, okay, yeah. Just
sorry to unpack all that on you.
That's fine. That's fine. That's what I'm here for. I would guess, and it may be worse than this or greater than this in numbers, I should say. Whether it's worse, I don't know necessarily, but I would estimate that at least 50% of the marriages between devotees amongst Prabhupada's disciples resulted in a divorce or splitting up. So you wouldn't be alone. You'd be you'd probably be in the majority, to be honest with you. And like I say, I don't know if it's worse. You know, that's a kind of a particular social and religious perspective, that marriage is for life and so on and so forth, and sacred rights, and it should be honored. And I think in the Catholic Church, I was raised as a Catholic, divorce is a sin. I can't remember, but I think so. But I think that life socially is more complicated nowadays than it was in the past, when those ideas that I just mentioned were more prominent. Marriages were, you know, very different, even in the Western world. When I was young, even to get married, it was very different. Starting to change, but you used to have to go and, you know, meet her father and get permission, and the whole, you know, it's not like that the same. And anyway, I wouldn't give it too much concern personally. I think that the two of you feel it's positive, and you're going to move forward in a way that works best for all concerned. And it's probably good. People get into relationships and think they're going to be one thing and find out there's something else. And I mean, you know, there's all kinds of different social standards that you could come up with, but everybody wants the same thing. Parents want usually their kids to be married and be happily married. That's what they want. They wanted that for themselves. That's for most people. And so how are you going to go about it? Well, you know, you get an astrologer, and he looks at the chart, and then you look at what kind of family he's from, what kind of family she's from. You try to match up all these, the different ages, relative compatibilities, right? You try to match up, and if it's not matching up on a scale of 10 points, of compatibility, above 8, well, maybe it's not a good arrangement. That's how it was looked at in the past, in the world over. It's not just in India, but throughout. India may have had a more sophisticated system about it. I'm not sure, but with astrology and so on and so forth. So that's practical. Look for compatibility and so on and so forth. That said, and so there are different even types of Vedic marriages and so forth. Incidentally, Krishna says that in Kali Yuga, the only marriage that's valid, Vedic marriage, and the best one is the gandharva marriage, which is based on infatuation only. That's the main point, which contradicts the whole other pragmatic approach. He mentions that in the Bhagavatam and in Mahabharata also, as drawn from the commentaries. But at any rate, things are different. I think you have to look at principles, moral principles, and then details. The details may change. The principle remains the same. So let's say the way of that people get together now is different. People may date. People may for a long time and not get married, and then later get married and so forth, which would have been totally irreligious, in previous times, living together and so on and so forth. But I mean, they want the same result. Their parents want the same result that is approached in another way. If you get the result, good. Well, now here you didn't get the result. You experimented. You got married. I guess you had children or one or something. And it's not working, and there are pragmatic reasons why it's not working. And so you make an adjustment and go forward. It doesn't have anything to do with your bhakti. It has nothing to do with bhakti. Bhakti, it has to do with varnashram, dharma, social religious considerations, and so on and so forth. So the fellow is wrong for advising you in that way, that somehow your bhakti will be negatively affected by your marriage status. They don't really. There's no like anga of bhakti to be married like this or not to be married like that. So he's kind of conflating a social religious perspective and that patched together in his head from some ancient times, what he might know about it, and trying to put that in place now in relation to you and your situation in these times, and at the same time, which doesn't make a lot of sense, and at the same time conflating a social religious concern with bhakti, which is the nivritti marg. It's the moving away from social religious identities. It's a transcendental goal. Bhakti stands on the head, of varnashram, sarvadharman prityaja ekam sharanam raja. So to say that your bhakti will be negatively affected or positively affected by varnashram considerations is to teach a version of bhakti that is covered by karma. Rupa Goswami teaches Gyan Karmadi Anavritam, that his Uttam Bhakti, the marginal characteristics of that Uttam Bhakti are that it's not covered by Gyan or karma. That means that I don't think my faith, my shraddha, and as a result, my practice is not such that I think it depends for it to be virtuous and fruitful upon observance of norms within the social religious system, let's say in this case of varnashram, that if I don't adhere to that, my bhakti will be negatively affected. If I adhere to that, my bhakti will be positively affected. That's to think that bhakti is not independent in and of herself to bring about the desired result. Do you understand? So this is fairly common. I see a lot of this. There's a confusion and a conflation between varnashram and bhakti that ends up becoming an advocacy of bhakti covered by karma. So it really has nothing to do with your bhakti. As far as your social status within the community of devotees, well, it depends on how enlightened and insightful and thoughtful the devotees are. And probably lots of these days married couples and married devotees realize that there's a fair chance that couples will run into issues that make them more compatible with one another if they separate from one another, and that's more emotionally stable, if you will, for horizontally speaking, for progressing vertically in spiritual life. So that's my opinion on that, and I'll end with what's a brahmachari have to say about all that. Brahmachari is going to tell us everything about marriage. It seems a little out of place. So I wouldn't pay much attention to that at all. Other than what I'm saying, I think it's important to pay attention to that and understand it properly.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much, Maharaj. I really appreciate that. That made me feel a lot better. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all your time.
Thank you.
So Krishna Das has a question next.
Dandavat. Good morning, Guru Maharaj.
Good morning.
So my question is kind of, it's related to Harinam Sankirtan in relation to the other like principal angas of bhakti. So I was wondering, sometimes I've heard that any one of the 9 principal angas can take one to become perfected in the path. But then sometimes I've also heard that any of the other angas are incomplete without one's engagement in Harinam Sankirtan. And of course, in our tradition, that's our main practice. So I guess I was wondering how to resolve that apparent contradiction or confusion I have.
Yeah, well, the angas are all independently capable of the principal angas, let's say, given by Prahlada Maharaja, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakhyam, Atmani Vidam, let's deal with those. They're all independently capable of delivering one from perfecting one. And Rupa Swami gives examples in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu of different devotees who became perfected by chanting. And there we have Sukadev, who chanted the Bhagavatam. That's a type of kirtan. Parikshit Maharaj, who heard, and so on. So maybe Prahlada Maharaj through remembering, and so forth. So he gives examples of all of them. There are many other angas of bhakti as well, and it would be difficult to incorporate kirtan into some of them, even amongst the main ones. Let's say Vandanam, offering prayers. How are you going to offer prayers and do kirtan at the same time? Unless the kirtan becomes the prayer. I mean, it's dasyam. It's not like, let's say you render service to the deity personally, and you have to be chanting all the time. There is chanting is involved in archan, that is incorporated there. That's true. But sakhyam, Atmanivedam, so on and so forth. So I think that the idea there that you sometimes hear that you're referring to without a precise citation or quotation to support the idea that Harinam has to accompany the others. I don't think there is such a statement, but the idea is that in the Kali Yuga, Harinam takes precedence, that it has it is particularly effective. It's the dispensation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Goloker Premodhan Harinam Sankirtan. So it should be prominent in the lives of the devotees. But I don't think every anga of bhakti, the 64, has to be done along with kirtan in order to be effective. But emphasis should be given to Harinam. So let's take an example, very relative to our practice. Our path, as explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to his external reason for coming was to distribute opportunity to enter the Ragmarg and attain the Braj Leela. That's how. Now you can imagine how esoteric his reasons for appearing are. That's his exoteric reason. So the Ragmarg, in particular, has an emphasis on smarnam. The Siddhadeha is a meditative body, so it's created, if you will. I mean, it's eternal, but it arises in a subjective realm out of meditation and so forth. So there's a strong emphasis there on smarnam. It's central to the practice Raganuga, following the Ragatmika. Ragatmika bhakti is the sadhya, the goal. Raganuga is the sadhana, as explained in Priti Sandarbha by Jiva Goswami. So, despite the fact that smarnam is central, the emphasis has been given by Jiva Goswami, Bhakti Sandarbha, for example, that it should be accompanied by kirtan. So, despite that, because kirtan is what it is in terms of Kali Yuga and the time and the dispensation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, therefore. So there are statements like that, and that makes sense. Bhaktisiddhanta, the great Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he said that kirtana prabhave smarana swabhave, that by the force and the power of kirtan, natural meditation will arise. Nothing can serve us better, excuse me, as a means to control the mind and senses than the power of kirtan. And when through the power of kirtan, the mind and the senses become controlled, then you're in a meditative state. So the kirtan fosters the meditation. So that's an example of how kirtan assists smarnam and is recommended, if not mandated, that smarnam be so assisted by kirtan. Again, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur saying the smarnam is currently coming out of the kirtan. And then within the smarnam, you go deeply. You can find yourself doing kirtan within the smarnam. So I think that's the idea. That help?
Yes. Thank you very much, Guru Maharaj. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
So there's another question, and it's in the chat. Okay, so it's from Bhajan Das, and he says, Pranam Guru Maharaj, could you please present some ideas regarding the relationship between the two verses, Aham Vedmi Sukho Vetti Vaso Vetti Na Vetti Va, and the verse about the commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam submitted by Sridhar Swami, who has a very similar format, but some different points. Raj Vetti Na Vetti Va. I did not find the verse, but I have heard it in your classes about Sri Nrsimha, and the verse concludes by saying that the mercy of Lord Nrsimha, Sridhar Swami, understood Srimad Bhagavatam.
Yes, those are two similar verses, but they're different. And the latter verse is a verse that is said to have emerged from the Shiva deity, at whose feet the Bhagavatam commentary of Sridhar Maharaj was placed. It was placed there because Sridhar Swami was the leading acharya in the Govardhan Math of Shankar, which is in Jagannath Puri. And so he has an Advaitin background, but his commentary was inconsistent with the Advaitin Siddhanta. And so there was some confusion about that as to its authenticity and so forth. And apparently some debate, and it was a dispute, to go back to our first question, was resolved by putting it before an unbiased person who would consider it carefully. Mahadev Ki Jai. So the deity of Shiva responded in this way with this verse. This verse is said to have come from the deity in some way. And it's similar in the first two lines to the other verse, which comes from Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's a Sanskrit verse. It seems to be a verse of Krishnadas Kaviraj's own composition. And the first two lines say that, well, Vyasa may know the Bhagavatam, he may not. Sukadev knows, Shiva knows. Vedmi Sukam Viti, Vyaso Viti na Viti Va. This person may know, that person may not know, even though they spoke it, is the implication, even though they heard it. But what is for sure, and this is where the second two lines come in, Shiva says, what's for sure is that Sridhar Swami knows by the grace of Nrsimhadev. Nrsimhadev was the Ishtadeva to the deity of Sridhar Swami, who it appears that Govardhan Math at Jagannath Puri, the priestly class there, religious personnel, they do the puja at the temple of Jagannath. They're all Advaitins. And it's been going on for centuries. And in that math, that monastery of Shankar, of which there are four, bhakti is prominent. Now, bhakti is seen as a means to an ends. The deity is seen as provisional, saguna Brahman, and so on and so forth, which, of course, is the Mayavad conception that we take exception to. But Sridhar Swami and others were disposed towards bhakti considerably, despite their Advaitin perspective. And in some cases, it appears quite clearly that bhakti got the upper hand, if you will, and they converted to a bhakti conception over the Advaitin conception, wherein in the bhakti conception, Bhagavan, is seen as eternal and so on. There's no saguna Brahman and nirguna Brahman. Brahman, in all respects, is nirguna, not a product of the modes of nature and so forth. So, let's give the example of some of the prominent sannyasis in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission, who considered to be the roots of the metaphorical tree of bhakti. Keshava Puri, Keshava Paramananda Puri, Brahmananda Bharati. I mean, these are all arguably coming out of the that same mont, or influenced by its bhakti influence, and they converted. And became members of a new, even bhakti school, the school of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and the metaphysic of Achintya Bheda, which was gradually developed by the Goswamis, and so forth. So it would appear that we look at Sridhar Swami in that way. But at any rate, the verse says that by the grace of Nrsimha, that he understood the Bhagavatam. Now, the verse of Krishnadas, he may have been playing off of that verse, but he appears to have written his own verse. And he says, Ham vidmi sukam vetti, Vyaso vetti vetti. And so this one may know, that one may not know, may know. But one thing's for sure, he says, that it won't be understood, the Bhagavatam, just by intellectually studying the tikas, atika and buddhaya, not just by studying the tikas as an exercise of buddhi, of intelligence unto itself, but by surrender, by devotion, by serving. Forget the last line. If you could think of it, maybe it's in your chat, the whole verse. Look up the chat here. No, you don't go to the last line. I can't remember the last line. But anyway, by the grace of the devotees, by bhakti, it is a fully trans-rational explanation of how the Bhagavatam will be understood. So there are different verses. They're similar, but they're different verses. And it's possible, again, as I say, that Krishnadas Kaviraj composed that verse and played off of the earlier verse, changing it slightly for the point that he wanted to make. But in effect, both verses saying the same thing, because Sridhar Maharaj understood by the grace of Nrsimhadev. So by bhakti, by grace, only you can know, not by, and of course, studying the tikas and buddhi as a way, if you will, is akin to how it's the ideal of the Advaitin school is pursued. They're gyanis. So Krishnadas verse is a little bit anti-gyani, if you will, and saying that lots of people studied the Bhagavatam and different tikas and made their own tikas, but they don't understand it. You have to understand it by grace. And Shiva said in the other verse, well, Sridhar Swami is understood by the grace of Nrsimhadev. So their conclusion is the same. I hope that helps.
I will see if they write in the chat. But Indra has a question next.
Yeah, may I? Cool. Hare Krishna. No. I have two questions
Can't hear
about.
you.
Oh, Hare Krishna. Pranam. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Did you do the English and read original audio? Yeah,
Terrible.
try that.
I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Oh
Okay.
my God. So where do I do this again? Interpretation, right? Okay, so English now better?
Yes, now I can
Hare
hear you.
Krishna. Pranam. I'm sorry. Do have two questions about Radha Kunda. So, it is said that we are invited to take a bath in Sri Radha Kunda. And when I was allowed to enter the dam and actually, take my bath, I was also like, instructed, there's a certain way to do this, offer your obeisances and mantras and everything. But then it's also said that, you shouldn't, have a lot of reverence and, don't touch the deity with like your feet, for example. So I was just wondering, maybe if you can just shed some light on this. And I was asking my husband, and he actually said, well, Indra, it's like, when the baby touches the mom with its feet, the mom doesn't mind. So, but I was wondering, maybe you can say more about this. Maybe.
Well, I think there are different perspectives. Some people say that they revere Radha Kunda, synonymous with Radha, if you will, as the Padma Purana states, to be such that they won't bathe in her. And then others look at it another way. Govardhan Hill is looked at that way too. In the Pushti Marg, they walk on Govardhan Hill, and in the Gaudiya Marg, that's the Vallabha Sampradaya and the Gaudiya Sampradaya, they don't, but they both have the same reasons. I forget the Pushti's reason for walking on Govardhan Hill, but it's not out of lack of regard. So it seems that there are different ways in which the bathing and Radha Kunda can be looked at, both of which have the same ideal in mind, and whichever one is more appealing to any individual devotee is the one that they should choose. In our particular lineage, coming from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, there was more of, I would say, let's say a conservative way of looking at it, and a reluctance to bathe in Radha Kunda, even to spend time there. I can't hear you anymore, by the way, but as time has gone by and members of our lineage have spent more time in India and so forth, they imbibe sensibilities from local people and other lineages and whatnot, and Radha Kunda bathing has become more of a thing. It wasn't something that was emphasized by Bhakti Siddhanta, but it does not necessarily that those who do are bad, or, as I say, it's just different ways of looking at it. Your husband tried to apparently philosophically rationalize it and so forth. So it's not that if he advocates bathing in Radha Kunda, and he doesn't have reverence or regard for her. So those are my thoughts on that. What's your other question?
So do you bathe in Radha Kunda, or would you recommend this for us, or no?
I don't bathe in Radha Kunda.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No.
Good. Then this was my last time that I was bathing in Radha Kunda. Okay.
But I bathe in the Ganga, the Jamuna. I haven't been to India in a while, but and you could raise similar arguments. How can you touch Ganga with your feet? She's worshipable, and so on. She's merciful too. So, but yeah. That it?
Yeah. And the second question, thank you, is just maybe also a quick question, because I was reading that somebody put the ashes of a devotee in Radha Kunda just like recently, and so I was also thinking, is this to be done, or?
I never heard of that. I certainly wouldn't do that. Again, their intention is good, but and that's probably the most important thing. But then I don't know if that's a custom there. I've never heard of that before.
No, it was like a Western devotee.
Yeah, I probably would have not done that.
Yeah, but Yamuna would be fine.
Yeah. That's the custom. Common people following that from the Braj. That's very typical. So that's there's a precedent for that. As far as Radha Kunda, I don't know if there's any such precedent for that. I'm certainly not familiar with it.
Yeah.
Radha Kunda ki jai.
Ki jai. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else? Yeah. Will, is that someone else talking? I can't. I just saw in the chat that, is it Maros has a question? Do you want to unmute?
Prahlada Maharaja.
Yes.
So I have a little bit like follow-up question to this Aham Vedmi Shukoveti Vyaso. That I read in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that there are 5 kind of people considering knowledge of rasa. The one who don't know, then ones who know something, then one who knows only knowledge. So my question is that I know nothing about this. So is it okay for me to study about rasa to know only from in like theoretically, or I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. You broke up a little bit. I couldn't hear everything you said, but you mentioned something about 5 different types of people. What verse are you referring to in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu? Do you know?
I don't have it now, but I can. Maybe if someone else have a question, I can find it.
At any rate, the gist of your question is that you don't know anything about rasa. So does that make you unqualified to study about rasa? That's your question, right? Yeah. Well, it would seem like if you don't know anything about rasa, that you'd be the prime person for learning about rasa. So I think that it's one thing to taste rasa. It's another thing to learn theoretically about what is bhakti rasa. The latter is an exercise in tattva. The former is an exercise in bhava. So you don't have bhava. Rasa is over your head, which is the essence. This distillation of bhava is rasa. But there's the books were not, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu was not written for somebody in bhava per se, but for someone who needed to understand the tattva, the ground, if you will, out of which bhakti rasa arises. So that's an important book for all devotees. Prabhupada thought it was important enough to write his summary study on it, Nectar Devotion, which he wanted all the devotees to read. So to become acquainted with the theory, I mean, it's not just, rasa is not the only subject, for that matter, of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. It's the whole practice, the angas of bhakti, the definition of bhakti, the different types of bhakti, in the first, what is bhava bhakti, its nature, what is sadhana bhakti, its nature, what is prem bhakti, its nature. This is all in the first quadrant, if you will, of the book. And then you go into the ingredients of bhakti rasa, the vibhavas, which start to describe Krishna, the qualities of Krishna, and then of course it goes through the other ecstatic ingredients of bhakti rasa, your anubhavs, sthayi-bhav, vyabhichari-bhavs, and so on. And then the different rasas themselves, analyzed, and then some analysis of the combination of rasas and what are compatible or not. All this is very important theoretical material that will be good for any devotee to become acquainted with. So you should definitely study. That's a very good book to study. Study with under guidance, and you can ask questions and get clarity and so forth. So it's a complicated book, but yeah, I do recommend it. And you don't have to be a rasika to read it. Now there may be other books that only a rasika will really benefit from fully. Someone who's not a rasika may benefit partially from them, but they're books of relish itself. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is not a book of that nature. It's more about the theory of rasa. Does that help? I don't know, we seem to have lost contact with you. I hope you heard my answer.
Yeah, it seems like it's frozen. Yeah, hopefully he heard it.
Yeah.
So Umkar and Gayatri have a question, and that's in the chat. They say, Jai Guru Maharaj, can you tell me where that verse is found about the Gandharva-marriage? And was it you concluding from Tikas or a verse itself that says it, please?
It's said directly in the Mahabharata. I don't know the verse of Mahabharata, but I have seen it. I may have cited it in my book. I mentioned this point in the book. I may have cited the verse from Mahabharata, referenced it, so I'll take a look there. I don't recall. And from the Bhagavatam, I've cited that also, and I can't recall if it's directly Krishna speaking or from the Tika. I will have to look that up for you and get back to you. And it's an interesting question that you pose, but I wouldn't make the Tika less important than the text, if that at all is at the heart of your issue. Tika or text, as far as we're concerned, is valid praman. But at least I know we have, it may be from the Tika in the Bhagavatam, I can't recall, but I'm quite sure it's from the verse in the Bhagavatam or in the Mahabharata. We have both, in the least. Okay, another question. Someone is saying, looks like Ganga Shakti. She says, I seem to have a problem understanding manjari-bhava. It is considered a part of madhurya-rasa, but doesn't it consist mostly of sakhya and dasya? Could you please explain? Thank you. Yes, it's a complicated subject. It is a form of a madhurya-rasa, wherein the kama or the eroticism is subdued. So the eroticism for Krishna, the romantic love for Krishna, is present in the manjari, but it's suppressed by dasya for Radha, and that dasya borders on sakhya. So it's not like a super formal dasya. Manjaris will sit on the same bed with Radha, a sister, and so forth. So, and I should say that in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, arguably the Manjaris are referred to as friends of Radha, those who give precedence to the friend of Radha over Krishna. That would be the friend being Radha of the Manjari, and precedence being given to her rather than to Krishna, which is peculiar. There are devotees who give precedence to Krishna over the friend, who see them equally in terms of their love, and in an extreme situation where the friend is given emphasis over Krishna. So that latter arguably refers to Manjari. So there's a reference to seeing Radha as the friend. Sometimes we refer to it as Radha Dasyam. Sukadev, or excuse me, Raghunath Das Goswami says, I don't want to be the friend of Radha, only the servant. So he's emphasized that side, in as much as there are those who are primarily friends of Radha. This is called Sakhi Pranay. Sakhi Pranay. Friendship among the ladies. Among the friends, friendship among friends. And this is a reference to the lady friends. So there, anyway, Raghunath gives a strong emphasis on the dasya side. But you're right, the dasya and sakhya are certainly elements of the manjari-bhava with regard to Radha and with regard to Krishna, because the manjari has a platonic relationship with Krishna. She's particularly characterized as one who does not want to have a direct romantic union and relationship with Krishna. And even if he pushes for that, she pushes back. That's her characteristic. And he takes pleasure in that because it indirectly speaks of her chastity, if you will, to Radha, and is her extreme serving attitude for her friend, for Radha, to put her first and so forth, and to push her towards Krishna. So he takes pleasure in that. And arguably, therefore, she has a friendly relationship with Krishna. It's a romantic relationship, but it's of more of a platonic nature. It doesn't turn into a romantic, directly, if you will, affair. So yes, these elements are there in manjari-bhava, but it is at the same time that it includes these influences, a division of madhurya-rasa, as explained by Rupa Goswami and Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Although there are many nuanced expressions of madhurya-rasa, he gives two basic divisions therein, sambhog and tadbhav. Sambhog refers to those gopis who desire to have a direct relationship with Krishna for his pleasure. They're not selfish like Kubja. So Kubja could be called sambhog in another sense, but Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Rupa Goswami, and Jiva Goswami does not disagree in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that the sambhog, those who have sambhog, who are filled with each desire for sambhog, union with Krishna, are doing so for his pleasure only. It's not a selfish thing. What's an example of somebody like that? Well, Radharani would be an example. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives the example of Chandravali. So same. They have direct relationship with Krishna for Krishna's pleasure. That's the one division, sambhog ichamai. The other division is tadbhav ichamai. Tadbhav means the becoming one, tadatmika, tadbhav, with the bhava of a heroine, like Radha, for example, in our case, in our sampradaya. So rather than pursuing a direct romantic relationship with Krishna, pursuing the romantic relation of Radha with Krishna by way of assisting her. So this is called tadbhav, and this is the preferable type of madhurya-rasa in the opinion of our founding acharyas, and they are steeped in that themselves. And it is a complicated affair, as you mentioned, but despite the fact that it has influences of sakhya and dasya, it is a form of madhurya-rasa. Now, that said, in a peculiar statement in the Priti Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami says that the heroines of Braj, the ladies of Braj, have madhurya-rasa mixed with sakhya. I've written an article about that. Hasn't been published yet. That's his opinion, peculiar. But there's some evidence to support that perspective. Somewhat of a reverse, the Priyanarma Sakhya mixed with Madhurya mixed with Sakhya. But I don't think there's anything to be confused about. Again, the manjari-bhava is a particular type of romantic love. the manjaris are charmed by Krishna. They think he's the ideal, hero, and so they just want him to be united with the ideal heroine, and they don't think themselves to be such. I hope that helps. Okay, Maro says, replied, sorry, my computer went off. I hope you can get the replay of that, but basically I said, if you can hear me now, that the Bhakti-rasa-amrita Sindhu is a book of tattva, about the theoretical theory of bhakti rasa. It's not a rasika book that can only be relished by rasikas. And that if a non-rasika reads it, won't get much out of it and think, it's not such a great book, I guess, something, or they misunderstand it. For some books are written for relishers who have the capacity to relish. Bhakti-rasa-amrita Sindhu is not like that. It's a book about the theory. So if you want to know the theory, which you should, not only about bhakti rasa, but about sadhana bhakti, the definition of bhakti, what's the nature of bhava bhakti, what's the nature of prema bhakti. This is all given in Bhakti-rasa-amrita Sindhu. It's an important book. Prabhupada wrote his Nectar of Devotion for all of his disciples, which is what was a summary study of the book. Oh, all right. I reiterated that briefly for you because you weren't here. So we have one more question. There are 5 types of, that's his question, right? There are 5 types of people who consider those who experience rasa, those who experience the stage of those who understand about rasa intellectually, those who are mistaken about rasa, and those who know about rasa. So you want to be someone who understands about rasa, not someone who's mistaken about rasa. You have to study Bhakti-rasa-amrita Sindhu for that. That's what that's for. All right, so we've run out of time. I think we answered most of the questions. So thank you all. I hope to be with you next week.
Thank you.
Hare
Thank you
Krishna.
so much, Gurudev.
Bye.
Haribo.
Jai Radhe.
Hi. So I'm just gonna make some